Okay. Brian Henwood. I was born at the time the band was born in 47. So the band was a decade old by the time I walked into the band room here with my brother Leonard. I was 9 and he was 8, and I was shown the instruments that we were going to play. Even at that early stage, I was given a bass, and brother Leonard had a baritone. And the teachings in those days were, it looked primitive, but it was the great master, Mr. G.L. Vivian. He had very strong principles and morals. So you didn't just learn music, you learned all the basics of rights and wrongs as you grew up. It was a crossroads for me because I hadn't realised at that stage just how bad my eyesight was, even in those early days. So I was at a loss at that time, and I give a lot of merit to the teachings of Mr. Vivian of my future life. He sat down with me. I remember one of the first discussions we had. He installed in me that the bass was a foundation instrument, and that word foundation stayed with me right to this day. And he explained that now you're the foundation of the band with this bass. He said, now you know what a foundation is. If you get it all wrong, the house is going to fall over. So that just stayed with me all the way. And I think that I learned very early in the piece that if you wanted to learn, he had all the time in the world to teach you. So I think right at this early stage, we were very blessed to have the teaching of Mr. G.L. Vivian. And he had our mouthpieces there. I don't think we took them home for a couple of weeks, but he had little leather tags on them, tied a bit of string around the mouthpiece with your name on it. And when you walked in this band room in those days, you could smell a disinfectant. He was very, very clean habits, and he taught those as we went. And very important that you didn't pick up any habits, making sure that your fingers were always on the keys, and I think David can elaborate later on some of the tricks that he used to try and instill in you that wasn't the right way to play the instrument. The other thing that was very interesting was he was a tonguing man. Everything was triplets. All your practicing, your scales, the whole lot was all done in quavers. And the theme march when we arrived in that band, and I think it was the theme. When I say the theme, a lot of bands had a march that was their pet march, and the pet march for 2 decades. So for 20 years, it was the Young Brigade. And if you listen to that march, it's trumpeting all the way, tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut, all the way. In fact, I was told by somebody that in his early days, he was a radio operator or Morse code. And that's where he got this dit-dit-dit and all that sort of thing. But I think that's rather false. But so the teachings were extraordinary. We were very fortunate to have gone through that. Now, getting back to the band, when I joined, we had a very large learners group of up to 14 young people. Now that's half a band, and remembering that there was already 25, 26 players existing in the band. So that learners group would have gone for about 2 months before we entered the band. And it probably took oh, how long do you reckon, David? A couple of months before you were allowed to take your instrument home. And my mother was very pleased when Leonard and I walked in the house with a baritone and a bass. Her comments were, "There's no cornet, thank goodness." The squawks of cornets were a bit like a bagpipe going in the back room, I think.
Especially when you're learning.
Especially when you're learning, exactly. And so I could rattle off when I sat down in the band. We had Tuesday night practice followed by, that was the young band, and then we had a Wednesday night full practice. So we had 2 nights a week in those years. It was 1956, and I think it was 52 that the girls were on a trial basis, believe it or not.
I believe they had to be of good character.
Well, that fits in. That certainly fits in, and
well, it certainly would have taken a while to kind of get that idea across, because it was the Kerepehi boys band, wasn't it, KBB? So yeah, they would have had to change everything.
I think it's poignant for me to mention anyhow that Turua was of course where we were, and there was a swag of players from the Turua area right back to the initial founding of the band, the founding players. I can name 5 off the top of my head from Turua, and that was Tom Gray, Tom Handley, Norman Nicholson, Noel Fox, who's just passed, and Billy Maunder. So there's 5, and I apologise for anybody I may have missed, but that was the initial band. And before this band room was built, they used to practice in Turua at the old Robbie Robinson's garage. That was in the very early times. And yeah, what else can I say there? As far as the learning, we have a player sitting out there right now that was involved in an incident that always went down with a bit of a joke attached. Some of the players, because the Anzac service at Waitakiruru went late, some of them went in cars because they had to get back to milk, but the bus carried the bulk of the band. And anyhow, this particular day, Les Baker out here, he turns up on his Norton motorbike, and he wasn't going to go on the bus. He wanted to show everybody how well his Norton went. And anyhow, we headed down towards the Kerepehi Hotel at the stop sign. Everybody stopped. Les was behind the bus. And in fairness to Les, you did get a good view from Nadia and from the other direction. And Les decided that Johnny Durman was taking too long to pull out, so he pulled out and passed the bus. Johnny Durman obviously saw what he was up to, and he took his time in turning the bus around, leaving Les nowhere to go but into the drain. And so the last look we all had was Les entering the drain on his motorbike. And we thought, well, that's the end of Les. We won't see him at the Nadia service because it was a pretty tight schedule. But sure enough, he turns up. That's the commitment from bandsmen, you know. He turned up, he still had his socks halfway up his pants, and we're sitting down to play God Saves the Queen, I think, and Rolly Bradley, the late Rolly Bradley, was sitting alongside me, and we started giggling because at the top of his uniform pocket there was frogweed hanging down there, and I said to Rolly, I said, I wonder whether there's a tadpole in there, and of course he started laughing, and I don't know how we got through the Queen, but yeah, so that was, Les remembers that.
What he remembers about is all us guys laughing out the window of the bus as he's crawling out of the drain.
Always referred to it as the Great Escape. I always used to tell people, you didn't know we had a Steve McQueen in the band, did you? Les theirs was quite a. They loved their motorbikes. Yeah. And then there was another incident at the Hauraki Plains at Nadia AMP show, and we had no drum major, and we were asked to lead the grand parade off the domain, and so off we went. It was prior to me losing my sight, so it must have been losing my sight in my left eye, because I was on the right flank, and anyhow we followed the white line from an athlete track. Well, I used that as a guide for the band, and I could see this tent coming up at 100 miles an hour, and I was heading straight at it, and I thought, goodness, we're in trouble here. And no drum major, and the smart and quick actions of Eric Goss. He dropped his trombone nice and neatly down to his left, and I always remember out of my left eye seeing him do a couple of quick bunny hops to the front, and he said, "Band, left wheel," and we just missed that tent by about a foot. We were about to enter the tent, the whole band. And he got reprimanded for that by Max, and don't you ever do that again. Well, I think the circumstances, I always call Eric international rescue. He was always ahead of an incident,
Yeah.
even if he was involved in most of them.
Oh, you mentioned that we used to open halls. Every time I go past Mangatafri Hall, open 1963, I remember being there. By this time, old man Vivian had stopped conducting the band. He had finished, and Max was conducting.
Max had.
And I had a solo on the cornet to play Crimond, and of course I stuffed it up. I didn't even know where I was starting. And Max was up the front with a baton in one hand and was cornet in the other, and he just played it as he was conducting and playing at the same time. Yeah, which he did quite a bit of. Oh, Max, he was very good.
There was, but the band had a full, as I said earlier, full calendar. Christmas time was just as they patch on today. We'd go way out to the island block with trucks, and again it was Fawcett Transport in those days, Kerepehi Transport today, and gee whiz, we used to upset all the bulls that started roaring and everything out there, and then we were caught in rainstorms. We had no cover. We'd hook up lights and that, run the truck batteries flat, and then we had to get trucks towed. And it was a nightmare. But we were recognised for the community work, obviously, that the band did. You know, from church garden parties. There's nothing that we wouldn't be involved in. The used to be a deluxe bike race, used to come through here in November, and we'd be in Pyro, market day, when the bikes all came in. And I think it's got to be remembered that the working ones, had to get time off, and it was through the day. And so the New Zealand Dairy Company was probably one of the biggest employees of the outside the farm boys that were in the band. But if I can just mention, when I come into the band as a learner, I can mention the names right around the back row, and we started off with Alf Hotham, the three trombones, Alf Hotham, Johnny Miller from Turua, and Eric Goss. There were your three troms. And then we had about 4 euphoniums, and Bruce Harvey, Meliquin, I forget his first name, and Noel Edmonds, and Cheryl Logan, one of the finest euphonium players ever sat alongside me. Another girl. I suppose you'd probably say there was 10% girls in the band in those days. So they grew very quickly when they were accepted. And then we went on to the bass section. There were baritones first. There was Mary Ryan and Leonard, my brother, and then there was myself on E-flat, Doug Jensen on E-flat, Rowan Garrett out there, I think today, I don't know. He was on the double E, and then we had John Hoggerty, Rolly Bradley, and Ken Harvey. Oh, I forgot Bruce Harvey on the phone here. So, you know, there was, I think, six basses, including Stuart Benny when he was there. So she was a big band. I don't know how they all fitted in here in memory today. Must be over 30 of them. If I can back the truck up and go back to my father's and my grandfather's days in Truro, I have a baton here that was presented to my grandfather in 1931 for the Truro Boys Band. Now, a lot of people would never even heard of it, but there was well over 20 lads in those days. I have a couple of uncles and my father and his brother, and of course my grandfather was the conductor. But there was there's Allen's, there's I think Tom Handley's father, and there's Bakers that go way back there, Arthur Sutton, all those old Truro names. Unfortunately, the big picture I have, which I've got a couple of copies done, don't have names, but some of the families might recognise their ancestors. It sounds terrible, but it's 31 years is a long. 1931 is a.
Yeah.
You got to remember it was right in the deep of the Depression. So I'd like somebody to do some digging, and there could be a story there. I don't think the instruments came this way. I think they went to Thames when the band folded. But getting back to my father, he was in the Pyro band and the Thames band. When the Pyro band folded in '54, I think it was, he went off to the Thames band. There's another thing that's would have been mentioned, and that's the teachings of the Kerepehi band. We never had outside players join the ranks, whilst the Vivians had the band, and that was well accepted and appreciated. So it wasn't until '68 when, I think it was '68 or '67, when Max and his dear wife Nori went over and did their work in Australia, that I broke free and I joined the Thames band at the same time as the Kerry band and took part in a lot of solo and competition that we never had. But in saying that though, the Kerepehi band in the 50s did compete in contests. I remember coming home from Thames in about 1955, I suppose, and listening to my parents talking in the front of the car, and my father, he was then playing for the Thames band. He just passed a comment that there was only one band was going to win the hymn test today, and it was the Kerepehi. They were very recognised in their strength with hymn playing, and that's where the quality of a brass band is established, through hymn playing.
Yeah.
And I always remembered that. So it wasn't until that time that the likes of Jack Brooks was able to join the ranks, and Chris Geelan shifted in about '68, '69, and we had quite a few Dutch families, the Leeftings, two families of Leeftings, and very fine players, the Dutch. And if I can mention while I remember, it would have been 1960, the Vivians decided to take the band, well, we went up to a concert in Auckland. The band New Zealand National Band had just returned from Holland after winning the World Championship over there. And if you ask Joe out here, he remembers he was a boy in Holland, and they didn't know where New Zealand was until this band come over and cleaned the show up. And so Mr. Vivian was in charge in those years, and he wanted to take the whole band up to this concert. So we all had to go up in uniform. No instruments required, of course. So we climbed on the bus. I was at high school in those days, and away we went in the red and white bus right up into Queen Street at the town hall. And of course, Johnny Derman, he never took the back door. He always took the front door, and he parked this big red and white bus right out in front. And of course, it was about half an hour before the concert was to commence, and people just stopped. And when this bus pulled up, and we started to climb out of the bus in uniform, and they thought, I'm sure they thought, they started to clap. They thought we were the Fair Dinkum. until some of the Tiny Tots come out, and that was a fair giveaway. But yeah, we thought this was just great, and I've got a record at home of the music of that night, and I think the encore was 76 trombones actually, I think it was. But anyhow, yeah, I remember coming home very late that night. Mum said no school tomorrow, so that was that was a bonus. But that was just the foresight of the Vivians. We were all one big family.
Yeah.
And then in '63, I think it was '63, might have been '62. Max was in charge then, and the whole band went up to a place called Swanson, just out from Henderson, and we stayed up there for a week in this camp. And Les Baker, remember, we had camp leaders. He was one, I was one, and there was a couple of others, and we all had teams, and we had the whole program was based on a concert programs which we had every year. We did a circuit to Ngatea, Waitakere and Kerepehi. We had a concert circuit we did, and that went right back to when I was in the Learners. So anyhow, we worked on this concert program, and it wasn't until we got back that we realised how a band going into camp like that, you were playing instruments 4 or 5 hours in the day, practicing, and the quality of the band through the tone, and it was so obvious. And so that was another outing that we put together, that the whole band pretty much went up to this Swanson, what the devil, Redwood Park it was called, Redwood Park, yeah, and used to wouldn't call me by my name, by anybody's name. He'd say, hey boy, and I remember in the learners group, I got up once and I was singing, and I was heading out the band room, and he said, hey boy, and I'd come back, and I remember coming home to Mum and telling her that I thought I joined a band, not a choir, because we had this concert circuit I was talking about, and he wanted me to sing, and he got his own way. I did. I sung Ring a Ting a Ling a Bell Bird or something. I remember. And I was only 8. No, 9 I was. And anyhow, then a couple of years later, I was going out of the band room and I was whistling, and he said, hey boy, I'm not going to stand up on a stage and whistle. But if you showed if you were interested, he had the time, and there's just incredible to to be taught by such a man, really. But as I say, it was everything.
Yeah.
It wasn't just music.
Yeah.
And his secret to it was he never buried us in theory. We learned the basics, and he got us playing melodies and tunes. You're going to go home and play something that makes sense. You're not going to go home and play papa all day. So that's why I encourage people to play solos and entertain yourself as much, and don't bury yourself in the, especially it's all right if you're a cornet player, you've got the melody, or if you're a euphonium or something. But a bass player, there weren't many bass players on the circuit playing solos when I was doing it, and so it was a challenge, but we loved doing it. I used to pick up Chris Geeland, and we used to go and help the Morrinsville band. That was through the early 70s, and they used to come over and judge our competitions. We had solo competitions in the Thames band room in those days. So me joining the Thames band, we sort of brought the two bands together on occasions for contests and that, which wasn't part of the scene when the Vivians had the band. But however, that was well accepted, and I'd hate to know how many, well, I'd love to know actually, how many pupils went through the Kerepehi band room here. It would be a lot of players. Anyhow, you supposed